everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk about marksman item spikes in 2021 and how Riot might be able to fix this sort of conundrum that they found themselves in. Now, if you haven't seen my video talking about the 2021 proposed changes to itemization, I do highly suggest you go check that out, as I will be talking about that in significant fashion here. But suffice to say, Riot have posted an article talking about a lot of the changes they're going to be making systemically to items in League of Legends, and talking about how they're going to support or how they're going to change support for various different classes of items. So, for example, Riot have said various different things about how tank items, we want them to have sort of capstone items, we want them to have items that give them some degree of utility, that let them flex their playstyle around based on if their team needs more initiation or if their team needs more defense, etc., that sort of a thing. Now, on one hand, they've talked a lot about this, and I do like a lot of their changes, but the problem right now is that their proposed marksman changes are a little cause for concern, in my opinion, and that's because Riot have said that, once again, they want marksmen to spike after one item. Now, if you weren't familiar with the meta game that existed a little while ago, a couple years ago, where that was the same case, the biggest problem we had with the meta is that marksmen were, by far, the de facto best champions in the game, bar none, once they hit their single item power spike, or even an item and a half. So, essentially, your Caitlyn, once she got her Infinity Edge, was now the best champion on your team, period, and would be the best champion on your team, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. That is how it exists for the rest of the game. You can maybe understand how this is potentially a problem, as Caitlyn spiking after one item, or any marksman really for that matter, I'm using Caitlyn as an example here, but any marksman, once they got their first item, was now the best champion in the game, which could happen very early. What this meant, though, is that now there was no reason to play anything even remotely risky in lane. There was no reason to even remotely play anything that couldn't support your marksman, because there just wasn't time for other classes of champions to be relevant at all. If you were playing an AD top laner, and sure, maybe you got the first kill in lane, and maybe you're trying to really carry the game on someone like a Kled or a Renekton, but the second the enemy AD carry hit their Infinity Edge, you no longer mattered. Heck, the second your AD carry hit their Infinity Edge, you no longer mattered. And in fact, you are now in a worse position than if you'd have played a tank and set up your AD carry for initiations or for peel. And so the meta kind of ended up warped around this character, and that nothing in the game really mattered other than let your marksmen farm up to their items, and then essentially hope the entire game rests on their shoulders and that they're able to carry. So that is not a great place to be in. I'm really not a fan whenever that's the case, because there just becomes no reason to play other kinds of characters other than the ones that can support your marksmen. However, currently, the biggest complaint for marksmen is that they don't feel impactful enough until they have two items, which does stand in pretty stark comparison to other classes, and we've even had metas where marksmen didn't spike until they had three items, and that does feel pretty bad for the marksman players because, well, essentially, your destiny is not in your hand. The only thing a lot of marksman characters do is they provide DPS for your team. And unfortunately, if you're not doing DPS, then you are doing literally nothing. Some marksmen do have the ability to provide other things to their team. Jhin and Ashe immediately spring to mind as being characters with some degree of utility that can do something for their team, even if they're not doing damage. But for the most part, marksmen are just how much damage can they deal reliably, how much damage can they deal, period. And that's kind of problematic for a few reasons, because you just don't get to really play the game as much. You just kind of sit around and hope you can hit your item spikes, and even if you do, the game might be too far out of your reach in order to scale up anyways, especially because the enemy marksmen might have gotten their items, and then it's sort of, you're back to where you were before. So this is a systemic problem with the game in general, because the question for Riot is, how do you balance out these situations? How do you make it so that marksmen can feel good after a single item, but also not feel completely oppressive afterwards and feel like the best characters in the game? Honestly, to me, I think this stems more from a systemic problem with the class in general. Marksmen are the only playable class in the bottom lane position, with the exception of one-off champions like Yasuo or Ziggs, who you see on occasion, who crop up every now and again. But for the most part, if you are playing bot lane, I would say in 98% of games, you are going to be playing a marksman. And this is a problem because every other position in the game has multiple classes of champions they can choose from based on playstyle or current meta or whatever they want. So, for example, if you are a tank player, you play exclusively tanks, and you're really looking to try and you know, your tank's play, let's say, is not very good because tanks are in a bad spot right now. You can always swap classes to start playing AD bruisers like Wukong or somebody else in the top side of the map. In the same fashion, you can play mages mid lane, which do have some degree of scaling that they have to worry about, but if mages are in a bad spot, you can always switch to playing assassins. And you also have the ability to say, I'm going to play an early game champion this game. I'm going to play Renekton, as opposed to, I'm going to play Maokai. Maokai needs a little bit more scaling, but at least I'm opting into that, whereas Renekton is good early, but he's going to fall off late. That at least is a decision I get to opt into, generally speaking, and say, this is what I want my experience to be like. Or, to make the comparison even more stark, Kale, for example, I can say I really just want to play a scaling, carry, damage dealer in this game, and so I'm going to play Kale, and I know I'm giving up on the laning phase. I could have played Renekton, I could have played Kled, but I chose not to. Marksmen, for the most part, however, don't have that choice. They are without exception, a class of hyper-scaling late-game carries, which means that, fundamentally, if you're playing bot lane and you're essentially expected to play a marksman, you don't get to say, I want to play somebody who's going to be good early, I want to play someone who's going to be good mid-game, I want to be someone who gets to spike after a single item, because of how strong marksmen are. So, and that ends up being a problem then, because you don't have the option of really switching up who you're playing. You don't really have the ability to say, I'd like to play something that's going to spike earlier. Essentially, you're dependent on the system itself to say, you get to spike early versus you get to spike late. And that ends up being a really feels bad problem for marksman players in general. Now, I would posit that marksman players should get used to playing things like mages if they want to be relevant at all stages of the game, and instead of saying, I'm going to play a marksman, but you also have to make it so that I spike after one item so I'm relevant and then become the best champion in the game just because of the way the systems work. But that's besides the point. I'm not going to belabor that problem, as marksmen have been the established bot lane carry for 10 years now, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So what can Riot do to make it so that marksmen feel better, but also don't spike after one item and immediately become the best champion in the game? I think a better solution is to find a better demarcation of the champions within the class. And now that sounds very complicated, but it's really not. I think that Riot can separate marksmen out slightly better into marksmen that are supposed to be good early, but who fall off very hard later in the game. Late game AD carries that need 2 to 3 items to function, but who, when they get there, they become the hyper scaling damage carry that you all come to know and love. And then somewhat carries that can kind of function in the middle, who have the ability of needing items to function, but they also don't fall off quite as hard as early game champions, but they also won't just dominate the lane. So let's say, for example, you have champions like Draven and Lucian, and these systems do sort of exist already, but let's say Draven and Lucian. These are characters that we can say, if you want to have a marksman that's going to be good after a single item, these are the champions you should pick. They're going to be good in lane, they're going to be very strong once they hit their single item, but they also don't scale very well into the later stages of the game. Later on, they're going to be characters that are significantly better than them at what they do. Conversely, you have champions like Sivir or Tristana, who you basically can guarantee that these champions need 3 items to function. You nerf down their base stats, you put them in a spot where they absolutely have to have, let's say, Infinity Edge and 2 Zeal items to function, or Infinity Edge, Essence Reaver, and 2 Zeal items to function. Something along those lines. That guarantees that these champions have to scale. They don't have the option of dominating the early stages of the game, but when they do hit the late game, they will be a hyper carry, and that way you know that you're opting into it. When I say I'd like to play Tristana this game, you know you're opting into a late game hyper scaling carry. You're not expecting to spike after one item. You know this for a fact, and if you're sick of that experience, you can always switch to an AD carry that plays better in the early stages of the game. I think it also makes sense to have some sort of mid-game AD carries that spike after an item and a half to maybe 2 items. I could, for example, maybe see Caitlyn being that kind of a carry where, sure, you're not going to dominate the lane quite as hard as maybe another champion would, but you're also going to scale a little bit better into the later stages of the game and not have to worry about fall off quite as well. I think this would be a good way of giving marksmen the ability to choose the experience they would like to have within a single class without telling them, hey, you have to play mages, you have to play assassins, you have to play double bruiser bottom lane. Hopefully that gets you in a spot where that isn't the case, and where they would have some degree of options outside of, well, just kind of, play whatever. So those are kind of my thoughts on how Riot can make the single item spike AD carry into a reasonable solution, as opposed to a, well, here we go again with marksmen being the best champions in the game, bar none. But this is just kind of what I've been sort of toying with. It's not an easy problem, guys. I don't think that Riot have a good solution for this problem, where you want to make sure marksmen have agency, but you want to make sure they also don't take over every single game. And that's a difficult proposition. It really, really is. So if you have better solutions or better suggestions, let me know down in the comment section below. Would love to hear your thoughts and kind of discuss this problem around a little bit more with you guys. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video just like this every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.